Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Brianna Nicole, bringing you another session of ghosts and glam. You already know the deal. I give you a full face of makeup while I'm telling you a ghost story. Now today I do not have a local, no ma'am, no sir. I have a very famous ghost story to tell you. I hope you're ready. Pour your wine, grab your snack, and let's get into today's story. I'll be bringing you the Whaley House. So my skin is already prepped per usual. Lips are prepped per usual. I'm using the exact same face milk as I used, which is a FourthRay Beauty Coconut Face Milk. I have been absolutely loving it. Now it's just time for me to clip back my hair. We're gonna get started. Now, just so you know, there's so much to unpack about this story. It's really crazy. Now, if you don't know anything about the Whaley House, it is located in San Diego, California. Now, the Whaley House is known as California State Landmark number 65. Now, this story is really interesting for me because it is a very old story. It takes place in the 1850s, and if anybody knows me, I was definitely born in the wrong time era. Let's go ahead and begin, shall we? Let's get into it. Now, the Whaley House was not always there. Now let's backtrack a little bit. Picture 1852, San Diego, California. A man by the name of James Robinson, also known as Yankee Jim, was charged with attempted grand larceny. He was supposedly trying to steal a boat. Why? I don't know. I mean, instead of throwing him in jail, they decided they were going to hang him. There was a property out in San Diego which was referred to as the gallows. It was where people would go and they would get hanged. Two different stories that I heard. One was that the rope that was used for him was way too long, so when the initial hanging was about to take place, it was too long, and so it didn't actually break his neck. It literally just strangled him to death. Now, the other story was that he was actually hung off of a wagon. Don't know exactly how that makes sense, but that's what they said. That's what I'm gonna go with. Apparently, he kept his legs on the wagon. Eventually, somebody knocked his feet off the wagon, causing him to hang. And again, it was not a quick death. It was not an instantaneous death. It was a pretty mortifying death where he literally sat there in strangulation for about 15 to 20 minutes. Now, a reporter that was there actually stated that Yankee Jim swung like a pendulum until he finally passed on. One of the people that was in attendance was a man by the name of Thomas Whaley. Now, Thomas Whaley, he had a little bit of money. He was a businessman. He dabbled in several businesses throughout the state of California. He is originally from New York, and he eventually moved over to California. For some reason beyond my comprehension, he decided that, well, I think this is the perfect place for me to build a house. Now, take into consideration, he just witnessed a man being hung. Obviously, this place was known for hanging. I don't know about you, but I sure as heck would not want to build a house on top of a place where I literally just saw a man get hanged, and not just hanged, pretty much strangled to death for attempting to steal a boat. So Thomas Whaley and his wife, her original name was Anna Delaunay. She was from France, and Mr. Whaley, he was of Scottish descent from New York, and they got married. He studied in Europe, and that's basically how they met. They were already married by the time he found this property. Now, back then, you really didn't get a woman's input as to where she would want her home to be. The men made all the decisions. I highly disagree with that, but that was the way that it was back then. So he decided, this is a great area. I want to go ahead and build my home here. Now, the hanging took place in 1852. By 1856, construction on the house had already begun. What originally started out as a granary, he actually had a brick company in his property. Now, the reason why he obtained this property was because the land was cheap. Of course, it was used for gallows. It was used for public hanging. mean? Ooh, I look a little bit light because I use my Fenty foundation, but it's okay. We're gonna bronze the hell out of my skin. Also, disclaimer, if you happen to hear some crying in the background, it's not a ghost or anything like that. It's just my new puppy. Looks like he's fast asleep, so hopefully we won't have any interruptions. Fun fact, this house is considered America's most haunted house, which means eventually after COVID and all this stuff, I really want to go to California, and one of the places that I definitely want to visit is the Whaley House. After the stories that I'm going to tell you, I definitely want to go and experience it myself. Now, here's the thing. A reporter from the 1800s had actually stated that this land was destined to be haunted. I don't know if he had some type of a psychic ability. I don't know if he was able to just read the energy. If it was just like a premonition. Because I gotta give it to men. Sometimes they just know. You know, there's women's intuition. I definitely believe that men do have some type of an intuition as to like what could potentially happen. Now, before this land was ever the Whaley House, was ever the gallows, it was a former battleground back in the day. So there was a lot of death that had already taken place before it was the gallows, where even more deaths had taken place. And then, of course, Mr. Thomas Whaley decided to build his house there. This building was noted as California's first ever brick building. Of course, he used the bricks that came from his own brickyard. He kind of had everything going. Some details about the house, which is really, really cool. I did watch the episode of Ghost Adventures because I'm a visual person and I want to see exactly what it looked like, because at first I was like, there's no way that all of these things existed in this house. Let me give you a whole list. This property contained a general store, a courthouse, living corridors, because obviously they had to live there, a school, a billiard room, a theater, a ballroom, a polling place, and of course a granary, like I initially said. There was a period of time where the family had actually vacated the premises for a good 10 years after the general store caught on fire, and there had to be some construction to redo the building, and then they moved back in. In those 10 years, the place was being rented out for storage spaces. There were a lot of courthouse documents that were stored there. Now, in that time, Mr. Whaley was charging them $65 a month, which now rounded out about $1,900 a month to rent out these rooms. The house, like the general store, it caught on fire. Now, supposedly, this house caught on fire not just once, but twice. Now, there was some speculation that there could have been a little bit of insurance fraud, because Mr. Whaley, although he had enough money, you know, to purchase this land, he wasn't in the most financially stable position to really provide for his family. On multiple occasions, he would leave and go to New York, you know, to go and find jobs there, just so he could provide for his family. Of course, especially after the second fire, he relocated his family to another residence. He actually had a second residence made for them that was just a one-story brick house. Now, on top of the two fires that took place on that house, the general store was robbed. Workers, now whether it was the courthouse, whether it was the servants, whether it was anybody that was working for the theater, actually started to pass away in that house. Now, in 1871, there was a seizure of court records. Another fun fact, although it's really not fun, the actor of the theater, his name was Thomas Tanner. He passed away 17 days after one of the premieres there in the theater. It's safe to say that this house was just full of, oh, what do we call it? Bad luck. Mr. Whaley and Anna Whaley ended up having 6 children. Okay, we had Francis, we had Anna, we also had George, we had Violet, we had Lillian, and we had Thomas Jr. Where the tragedy started was with Thomas Jr. He was only 18 months old, and unfortunately he passed away from scarlet fever. The second tragedy of the Whaleys was their daughter, Violet. Now, Violet was 22 years old, and she married a man named George. This guy George was a jerk. This guy George was absolutely horrible. He did Violet dirty. How? Basically, he thought that if he married into the Whaley family, he was going to receive a dowry. So when George got wind of the fact that he was not going to receive a red cent, he dipped. He up and left her, and Violet was devastated. He basically took her virtue and was like, oh wait, I'm not getting anything out of this? I'm out. Men. So, of course, Violet is absolutely devastated. She ends up getting a divorce from George a year later after the abandonment. But George moved on with his life and gave zero. And poor Violet was just absolutely heartbroken. She was declared a spinster because back then, not only was it a scandal for her to get a divorce, it was a scandal for her to not have a chaperone. Thank God it's 2020 and women can fend for themselves. It could not be me. So Lillian became extremely depressed over the fact that, number one, she was abandoned. Number two, she was divorced. Number three, at that age, being in that type of society, you were declared a spinster. Now in 1885, after this marriage had taken place, and of course after Violet was, depressed from her abandonment, over the divorce, over her status in society, she could not take it anymore. And one morning, I actually read the autopsy report, or not the autopsy report, but the coroner's report, and it is just so sad. So Violet had asked Mr. Whaley, her father, for keys to a box. He would give those keys to her, and he would always ask, that she return them to him. And she would. This happened a few days in a row, and on one morning, she went and she unlocked the box that contained a .38 revolver. She took the .38 revolver, hid it inside her dress, and went downstairs and went outside. She walked outside to the outhouse, which if you think about it, it's really sad. She really thought so low of herself that she didn't just do this anywhere. She went to the outhouse where you go to the restroom. Like, she basically thought of herself like shit. Can I say that? But she literally thought of herself as the lowest of the low, that she didn't even deserve to be anywhere within it. Like, she basically degraded her own self and went into the outhouse and shot herself in the chest. Now, Mr. Whaley had been looking for her because he was going to offer her a peach for breakfast. When he called out to her outside, he heard the gunshot and went running for his daughter. Found her in the outhouse, picked her up, brought her into the house, into the parlor, where 15 minutes later, she passed away. So it wasn't a quick death, it was a torturous death. She bled out. Now on top of that, Anna Whaley had married her first cousin. Now, Lillian, the other sister, was engaged to another man, but upon hearing all the drama, or the scandal, if you will, of what had happened, he decided it would be in his best interest to not marry her. So he abandoned her as well. So you have 3 daughters, 2 are abandoned, 1 was married to her first cousin, which, ew. Now, Lillian was, however, one of the first people that was actually documented there on her journal. She listed they would hear footsteps and dragging sounds while they were residing there in the house. Her father, Thomas Whaley, of course, he would chalk it up to it being Yankee Jim. I think one of the saddest parts is the poem that Violet left when she committed suicide. Mad from life's history, swift to death's mystery, glad to be hurled anywhere, anywhere out of this world. This was an excerpt from a poem called The Bridge of Sighs. Now, Lillian ended up becoming a spinster, like I said earlier, and she ended up dying in the house at 85 years old. She never left. Sorry, my dog is going ham on a ham bone. Now, Mrs. Whaley would make these cookies for the general store, and there was a little girl by the name of Carrie Washburn. She used to play with the girls there, and one day she came running because she wanted some cookies. Now, honestly, That'd be me in a heartbeat. Listen, I'm a sucker for a good cookie, okay? Especially when they're nice and warm and they're chewy and, oh, just, yeah, listen, I would have been running too. And this has a tragic ending. Carrie was running and she ran right into a clothesline that was right here at her neckline, and she broke her trachea and died. Now, let it be known, fun fact, that there are no records of a family by the name of Washburn living in San Diego at that time. So it is a possibility that this whole story was fabricated by one of the many employees there at the house to up the mystique, if you will, about the house. Now, on top of all the deaths that were taking place, there were soldiers, there were settlers, there were servants. All of them were passing away in this house, on top of the already 2 Whaley children that had died, and allegedly the unfortunate death of little Carrie Washburn. One time, the Whaleys had some family friends over, and that would be the first and last time that they would ever visit that house. While they were there, they saw a window unlatch and completely just fly all the way up. Honey, they played no games and they were out, and they said sayonara, never coming back, lovely house. But no, Mr. Whaley eventually decided to up and leave the house. So he and his family have relocated to another house, and for 20 years the house will remain completely and totally vacant. It falls into disrepair. Now, the son, Francis, returns back to the house in 1909. Now, he went to work and began the restoration process of the house. What he ended up doing is he opened up the house for tours, and in 1912, the remaining family moved back in. Anna ended up passing away at age 80. Francis would pass away 2 years later at age 60, and George would pass away 14 years later at the age of 68. Now, in 1960, the Whaley House was converted into a museum. Another fun fact, Miss Anna Whaley always thought that the land was cursed. Duh. Here we go into the hauntings, which I know is what y'all are here for. The first one would be little Thomas Jr., the one that had died at 18 months old. People claim to hear him crying throughout the house. The second, and in my opinion, the most frequent, would be Violet. Of course, the one that took her life in such a tragic manner. Violet is typically seen on the 2nd floor, which was where her room was. Now, people that visit the house say that when they go into the 2nd floor, they just feel this overwhelming, sad, depressive feeling just completely wash over them. And it's speculated that that is the spirit of Anna occupying that residence and just really leaving her energy there. And she always looks extremely sad. Mr. Whaley, oh boy, what can we say about him? I think that his appearances are just odd and somewhat rude. People have claimed that he blows pipe tobacco in people's faces. On another instance, so this little girl is on a tour and she begins to wave there in the parlor, and when she's asked, you know, who is it that you're waving at, honey? She replies, well, the man right there, he's waving at me, so I'm waving back. And of course, it's a given that children are more sensitive and they have the capacity to see things that as adults we cannot see, because children still have their innocence. Another place that you will typically see Mr. Whaley is standing on the landing of these stairs. So he's just standing there, just staring out. Sometimes he's got his pipe, you know, his little tobacco pipe. Some days he doesn't. He's just staring out. People claim to see him wearing a frock coat and pantaloons. Now, Mrs. Whaley. Fun fact, before I move on, the parlor in the Whaley house is the most active. The second most active place in the Whaley house would be the courthouse, and we will get into that in just a moment. But let's go to Mrs. Whaley. People claim to smell a perfume, which they claim to be hers. People will typically see her floating into the general store. I think one of the creepiest stories was the 911 call. Now, the 911 call, basically what happened is someone made a phone call stating that that they could hear a woman crying. And so of course the police show up and they happen to see a woman crying. Now the police officer, of course, he called out to her. Oh, Morphe. I went a little bit overboard with my blush. I'm gonna take some translucent powder, go over it. That's a little bit better. Police show up. He sees a woman in 1900s period clothing. He called out to her to see if she was all right, obviously. Now, when she turned around, she smiled at him. And of course, he kind of freaks out, so he grabs his flashlight, points it in that direction, and there's nobody there. She basically just vanished. Now, this cop was a career cop, and he did not state any of this until he was writing in his final report before his retirement. So another fun fact is that Anna actually appeared to the late Regis Philbin at the Whaley House. Again, Anna is typically seen downstairs sipping tea, or she is seen in the garden, and everyone describes her the exact same way. Now, when she appeared to Regis Philbin, it was basically like a white flash, and he kind of freaked out, got excited, and went to point his flashlight and to see what was going on, and instead of anybody being there, it was actually the portrait of Mrs. Anna Whaley herself. Now, a really creepy story happened to one of the tour guides that was working there. He was locking up for the night and he was setting the alarm. As he was doing that, he heard a voice saying, "Why are you here?" And Miss Thing, he was out. Now, of course, he was scared. He never finished putting in the code. That being said, the code set off the alarm, which called in the police department to come and see what was going on. So when the police showed up, he noticed a woman in a green dress, and so when he saw her, he went ahead and he called for backup. Now, by the time backup had arrived, she was gone. As I had said previously, the courtroom is the second most active place in the house. It said that in the back corner of the jury box there's a vortex, because apparently there seems to be a lot of activity that happens there. There's actually a woman that is inside the courtroom. Seems like she never really left there, and everybody that has seen her has given the exact same description, that she has a swarthy complexion, she's wearing a long full skirt, either gingham or a calico print dress, small print dress. It's always the exact same thing. She has dark hair, dark eyes, she has gold hoops on. Now, a psychic did state that she has seen a little girl there, mainly in the kitchen. Now, she's one of the main unidentified spirits that inhabit the house. It's most likely that she is the spirit of Carrie, but seeing as there are no records for her existence, it's kind of hard to determine whether or not that's actually her. Could these be spirits coming through the vortex? Nobody really knows, because there's many unidentified spirits that don't match any of the descriptions of the Whaleys. Now, to end this story on a high note, the Whaleys did have a dog by the name of Dolly Varden, which I think is really cute, and it also sounds like Dolly Parton. Now, the children, when they go on tours, they will always go and ask the tour guides, like, "Hey, can I play with the dog? Can I play with the dog?" And they will say, you know, "There's no dog here," but they will see the fox terrier of Dolly Varden. And with that, that concludes the Whaley House. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I hope that you also enjoyed this look. We still have a few more months of summer here in Texas, because fall doesn't start until November, so I'm taking advantage and wanted to do a little bright look for you. So let me know down below what stories you want to hear next. I have a little puppy that is craving my attention, and I am gonna go play with him right now because it's way past both of our bedtimes. But thank you so much for joining me for another session of Ghost and Glam. I really hope that you enjoyed it. All the products will be listed below and along with my social medias, so you can come and hit up your girl. Alright guys, I love you so much. Thank you again so much for watching, and be safe.